Some of the most common reptiles in the pet trade are tiny reptiles, but once you get into the larger ones, you need larger enclosures. So today, let's go over the top 5 reptiles that can live in a 75-gallon enclosure for their entire life. My name's Adam, this is Diamond, you're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles, stick around. Before we even start off, two pieces of housekeeping here. I'm talking about the average size of these animals, so of course outliers need bigger things. If you're an 8-foot tall man, you can't fit into a smart car like a regular man could, right? Second thing, bigger is almost always better. So just because I say 75 gallons doesn't mean you can't put these animals in a bigger enclosure. I just think this is a good enclosure size for these animals for their whole life. Let's get done with the boring stuff and start it off. Number 5. King snakes. Now, normally I like to make it very specific and talk about certain species. King snakes have hundreds of species inside of them. Every milk snake is a king snake, but not every king snake is a milk snake. And there are several milk snakes that fit in this category. If you wanted a Pueblan milk snake, for example, or if you wanted something that is a true king snake, something like a California king snake, something like a speckled king snake, if you wanted a California mountain king snake, there's so many different options. But let's kind of focus more on Big Lou and his kind, which is a California king snake, and those guys on average aren't going to get over 5 feet. So I think that if you were talking about males, that would be even better. So essentially, we're talking about an enclosure size that is 18 inches deep and 4 feet wide. So I think an animal that is 5 feet could fit in this, but your more average king snake of 3 to 4 feet would be kind of perfect in this enclosure. Although, you could always go to 120 gallon or even bigger. And of course, the care differs depending on the species. So don't just go, oh, well, Mr. Clean told me in a video that king snakes work. No, do your research before you actually get a snake. But if we're talking California king snakes, they like it a little bit drier and not super hot. Kind of a perfect temperature that if you wanted to use just like a halogen light or an under tank heating surface or something like that, under tank heating device, I'm trying to say here. And the care for most of these are really easy. Now, of course, there are king snakes that take a little bit more effort that are probably maybe even an advanced level, but the ones that I'm talking about, the ones that are very easy to take care of, most of them fit in a 75-gallon enclosure. And because the 75 gallon has a little bit of extra space, a little bit of extra height in some cases, you can kind of deck it out with more options for climbing or just different type of levels, not just the space, but also the space up and down as well. And if that's not enough for you, if you're looking for an animal that is always going to eat for you, king snakes are the ones for you. King snakes eat like, well, king snakes, which is why it's difficult to film with Big Lou, because he thinks everything is food, even your fingers. Let's move on to the next one. Moving on to number 4, stink pots or mud turtles. There's a bunch of different names. This is probably the smallest, really common and easily cared for turtle that you could possibly buy. Stink pots are called stink pots because they are stink pots. They kind of stink a little bit, but they are very cute. I'm talking like 5 inches, so very tiny and absolutely adorable. And in a 75 gallon, which I would recommend is the minimum, you could probably keep 2 of these. Now, you'll see other care guides, and they're going to say that, this is not a care guide, by the way, these care guides are going to say that a stink pot can fit into a 40. I personally think that you need more water than that in order to equal it out properly, give them a land area, which they do need, although they're mostly aquatic. I personally think a 75 gallon would be better for 1 or even 2, and then you could upgrade if you wanted 3 or 4 and get a 120 gallon or something like that. I think stink pots are amazing, and in terms of turtles, probably one of the better options for beginners. They don't take a ton of space, they're super cute, they're super easy, and I mean, like telling your friends you have a stink pot is hilarious. Number 3, painted agamas. Imagine like a bearded dragon, but in miniature form, and just a little bit different looking. These guys are from Africa, so they're not the same as a bearded dragon, but their care is very similar. I'm talking very similar with one main difference. The painted agamas are smaller, and that means that they can be housed comfortably inside of a smaller enclosure, like a 75 gallon. You can't put a bearded dragon in a 75. 120 gallons is minimum. Come here, you little silly goose. In my opinion. So it may be if you had a really tiny bearded dragon, but on average, 120. If you want something that is going to fit into a 75 gallon, that's going to have a really cool diet, likes it hot and dry, kind of looks similar and acts similar, super chilled out, painted agamas are right for you, or clown agamas, some people will call them. Either way, these are one of my favorite lizards that I don't have. I just feel like I have a bearded dragon already and I have the space for it. A painted agama is so similar, besides the fact that it's mostly an insectivore where bearded dragons are going to eat mostly vegetables as they grow up. I think they might be right for you if you're looking for something a little smaller than a bearded dragon with similar characteristics and similar care. And also, painted agamas are pretty awesome. Before we move on to the next one, I just want to say thank you to our sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. Tortoiseshells are hard, but looking cool doesn't have to be. Into the AM, if you're looking for the coolest, most comfortable, well-fitting graphic tees, nothing beats Into the AM. And right now, they're offering a bundle at a discounted price, any 3 graphic tees like this one here for $55. That's less than $20 a shirt. And if that's not enough, let's add another 10% off if you use the code WWR at checkout when you hit the link below. Thank you so much, Into the AM, for sponsoring. Thank you for filling my closet with the coolest clothing that I have. Let's get back to the video. Number 2, rosy boas and rubber boas. I always put these together because they're very similar, and they are North America's only 2 boa species. Boa species mean they give live birth. Well, in most cases, and definitely in the case of these 2. Now, you're gonna find rubber boas so far north, we're talking about into Canada. Parts of British Columbia are going to have rubber boas in the wild. They are small. We're talking about like 2 feet small. They usually top out around 26 inches, maybe a little bit bigger, but super tiny. Rosy boas get a little bit bigger, like a little bit warmer. These guys are gonna find mostly in California, that area of the world. And these guys are gonna get around 36 inches as they top out, but there are plenty of rosy boas that are only going to get to 2 or 2.5 feet. So if you want a really cool constricting type snake, but you don't want something that is big, there's really nothing that beats a rosy boa or a rubber boa. I guess the main difference besides the size and the way that they look and the fact that rubber boas don't have morphs, or as many of them that you can find readily as a rosy boa, is that rosy boas eat a lot better than rubber boas. With a rubber boa, you have to brumate it first before it eats, in most cases. In most cases, you're going to get a baby, you'll need to brumate it that fall and winter, and then once it comes into brumation, it'll eat. So it adds a little bit of difficulty. But going on to rosy boas, I think these might be a better option for that reason. They will generally eat right away. You don't have to brumate them, you don't have to do anything crazy, and they have an amazing food drive. So to me, I personally think that rosy boas of the 2 are probably better for most people, and they fit in that 75-gallon enclosure perfectly. But rubber boas, I think if you got one of those, it would just be more unique. Because although they're not super interesting looking in terms of their drab color, them having a tail that looks like a head to me is super awesome, and the fact that they are so docile. Rubber boas are probably not, if there was an animal I said for sure you're gonna have that's not gonna bite you, it's gonna be a rubber boa. They're not really defensive. Their food motivation isn't so strong that they're gonna bite your fingers. Just overall, I think they're great for different reasons, and Diamond's gonna peace out now, so let's move on to number 1. Okay, moving on to number 1, Antaresia. I know, I talk about spotted pythons too much, but I do not care. I will continue talking about them because they are so amazing. I love spotted pythons, children pythons, Stimson's pythons, pygmy pythons. Well, actually, Stimson's pythons and children's pythons are the same thing now. Neither here nor there. If you want something on the bigger end that'll fit in a 75-gallon, I would say a spotted python. Now, spotted pythons generally are going to be under 4 feet. If you get an outlier, then you need a bigger enclosure. It's something to deal with. But if you want a pygmy python, which is in the same family, but they're all from Australia, by the way, you can definitely have this thing in a 75-gallon enclosure. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. These animals are going to top out around like less than 3 feet, for sure. I've never seen an anthill python or pygmy python, same thing, that gets larger than 3 feet. And your enclosure is 4 feet long. And what I'm trying to say here is give them a little bit more height because they are a semi-arboreal snake, but they can definitely fit in a 75-gallon enclosure. Also, their food drive is magnificent. I love them for this reason. You will never have issues feeding an Antaresia, basically ever. My guy Jimmy is fantastic. Once you get them on as babies, by the way, as with most snakes, as babies, sometimes it's hard to get them on to eat, but once they start pounding food, they will pound food. No doubt about it. And their feeding response isn't so much you have to really worry about your fingers becoming food. What I'm trying to say here is, if you're looking for a tiny python that is going to fit in a 75-gallon enclosure, there is really nothing better than an Antaresia. So there you go. Those are your top 5 animals, reptiles, that are going to fit in a 75-gallon enclosure. What do you think? Is there something I should have mentioned? Is there something you don't agree with? Let me know in the comment section below. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, if you've hit like, subscribe, if you've left whatever it is to interact with this channel, it helps so much. I really appreciate it. And a special thank you, as always, to the Patreon supporters. You guys get extra videos, you guys get videos early, you guys get to watch the bloopers that I don't cut out, you guys get a lot of extra content, and for as little as $1 a month, you can know about a bunch of stuff that I don't talk about in this collection. And just like Diamond says, Patreon people are... Okay, that's enough. Because I do videos twice a week, that means that I'll see you on Thursday.